Welcome to the Macedon podcast. All expressions and everything that will be said after the music is only belongs to the moderator of the podcast and not the sponsors itself. So therefore you have your disclosure, you have been warned. Thank you, and thank you. I'm so glad to be back right here where everything started, which is Spreaker. If you haven't downloaded the app, you're listening to this on YouTube, you better download the app so you could have access to the to the entire episode. Sorry about that, we don't edit, we just play, record, and we go with it. Thank you for joining me. My name is Marcel Macedon Cruz, and this is the first official time that we're doing a podcast entirely in English. And the funniest thing is that it's the first time that we also move away from our usual topic that is mostly social stuff and political stuff that is going around in Puerto Rico. But if you want to know what is going on in Puerto Rico, especially in what it is in politics and social, you can also tune into El Macedon podcast, in which I give all the breakdown on that one. Since I'm actually, this is where I'm recording this, I'm trying to making this as timeless as I can. So I'm trying to be really careful on saying when is this recorded, how, but it's kind of obvious that it's wrestling, so it's kind of obvious that since the topic was given out, that when are we talking about this? So, huge event, WrestleMania, is right now, it's happening as we're recording. So, it's almost like, it's about to start in about, it starts in about like 20 minutes or something at the time, so it gives you a time on when I'm recording this. But the thing is that I'm starting my first podcast in the theme of wrestling. It's not just because we have the first WrestleMania, which is the main event. It is for the Women's Championship, also Raw and SmackDown, between Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and Ronda Rousey. But the main thing that we're doing, I've been wanting to do a wrestling podcast for I think forever. And since I even started doing podcasts, it was like, I'm going to do a political podcast, I'm going to do a social podcast, and then I'm going to focus on entertainment and wrestling. But it was not the case. Sorry for that. This is Puerto Rico's kind of hot. And this is the coolest thing about doing a podcast. You can dress however you want. So, moving on. The thing is that even though this is one of the, I would say, the build-up, the promotion for the main event match on this year's WrestleMania 35, it's really one of the most compelling. It really was really emotional, the whole build-up, and the whole way it has been worked. It has been sort of a way of WWE trying to tell critics, especially the ones that said that they don't have it and they're losing steam really fast, that they can still pull out some really nice surprises. And being the fact that it's the first time in 35 years that I think any event is headlined by a women's championship match, and it all comes from the fact that the women's division, and not only in WWE but in the wrestling world in general, is quite exploding. It's not longer anymore the whole bras and panties match and the whole sexual exploitation thing. Now it is a real, and most of the women are are actually outperforming the guys. So it is really something logical that WWE decided to go in this way and make a breakthrough before anybody else. I never said AEW goes away with it, because AEW on they have like this webcast, the Road to Double or Nothing, which is a pay-per-view that they will be having on May. I don't like to say the venue because the thing is starting to build up so much. The venue, I've heard rumors that the venue could even change. So, moving on that one, they stepped forward and made this main event match. But there has been like a lot of controversy surrounding specifically this year's WrestleMania, and it is due to the fact that John Oliver, on his show with John Oliver, he decided that he was going to point out something that has been really pointed out in the 350 Days documentary. Many shoot interviews through, I would say, like from 10 to 15 years. The fact of the conditions that WWE personnel work in, especially the wrestlers. And it is really bad. Is in my case, when I saw it, I didn't boo for John because he was making public something that most wrestling fans and the wrestling community, something that we already know. Something that is the fact behind the boos behind Roman Reigns. The fans are not actually booing Roman Reigns when that whole mess was happening. It was more like trying to boo a Vince and his way of running things. But the thing is that he started pointing out, especially on the fact of retirement, most wrestlers do not pass through the age of 61 and 62. There have been tragic deaths of many wrestlers in their 30s. And the fact that they point out is the grueling conditions. And he also pointed out something that went out really public when CM Punk decided to quit WWE, and it was the fact of I would say kind of suspicious, not to say corrupt, but corrupt is the right word, because if you're a doctor and you know these guys are really, really hurt and you're doing nothing about it because maybe you got some instructions from above, maybe he doesn't have instructions from above, maybe someone in the middle of the management chain told this doctor, and I don't even remember his name, the doctor that treated CM Punk for his concussions, and that he was telling him that he was fine, and when he went to get another opinion from another doctor, it turns out that CM Punk was really hurt and he was borderlining, practically ruining his entire career. So when we go back to there was a problem that was being exposed. When we go back to the Chris Benoit murder-suicide situation, and we go to all the studies that came out of it, it also shows the struggle, the way that it's not only the physical pain, but the mental. Let's not forget, we're going to Chris Benoit because when the whole 90s federal steroid scandal was going on, it was, to me, it was more like a circus. It was an accusation. There's drugs doing has the wrestler. We're talking about a company that is going really big. It's not that I'm saying that it was a good thing to do, or it was like I'm applauding it or justifying it. It's just that to me, it was more of a media circus of this guy trying to come up to sit with the big boys, with big billionaires, and let's put him on his first controversy trial. You know, besides the wrestling industry, this has happened. It's actually happening to Jeff Bezos, who is the owner of Amazon, and his high-profile divorce is being scheduled as perhaps the most expensive divorce in history. But going back to WWE, I think the whole mess started like going out in the public. I will say it in the whole Chris Benoit murder-suicide, tragic incident. And I say tragic because before I go ahead with it, I want to put my input on Chris Benoit. First, I was a fan of Chris since his WCW, ECW days. Mostly, I used to work mostly the work of WCW, because right here in Puerto Rico, on the 90s, we got access to those two only. We have knowledge of ECW, and they had their pay-per-views, their massive pay-per-views, but we couldn't get into a program or a build-up that was going to those pay-per-views. So we were kind of lost. I remember that me and my friends were watching ECW, and we were watching like, okay, these guys are kicking the living ass out of each other. We don't know why, but we're watching this because they're putting up great performances in those matches. And that's how ECW work outside the United States mostly. But in the case of Chris Benoit, I'm 5'5", so I'm perhaps not the tallest guy in any room, even though some people say that, and when you listen to my voice, it's something completely different. But the thing is with Chris Benoit, that I used to admire him because he was like something between 5'10", 5'11", but the way he performed, and I came from being a Bret Hart fan, a Bret Hart diehard fan. So I would say the Montreal Screw Job, even though there's so much mysteries around the Montreal Screw Job, but the thing is that in the end, just egos got hurt, not a family killed. And then the Brian Pillman incident happened, and I was in the middle of it. And I kind of got a little bit disgusted of WWE, which was WWF at the time. And I started watching a little bit more of WCW. The thing is that the whole NWO grand work, it was starting to turn to shit. So WCW started turning again to the format that it was a little bit previously to the whole NWO thing. So they were highlighting Chris more and more and more, and there was a final run. I think it was on the Four Horsemen on WCW that included Chris, and that was something to me that it was really big, because even though right here in Puerto Rico we could be limited to some of this regional, the whole regional war that went out throughout the 60s, 70s mostly. The thing is that the NWA title is something that we know. It's something that there's been so many NWA talent that has worked here. For example, Bruce Brody, who I'm going to talk about him later on, and the unfortunate incident, but he was on that kind. But Bruce Brody came mostly from Japan, New Japan Pro Wrestling. So the thing is that, moving on, and putting away all these facts, it's just that I want you to understand how I'm get feeded on this information, how a fan from outside the United States and mostly Latin America gets his feeds, with the exception of Mexico, of Mexico. And I want to say it right, because it's pronounced Mexico. And besides Mexico, that it has the AAA, and AAA is really amazing. In fact, the whole thing that has been made fun of on movies, there are some wrestlers that are unwilling to take their masks off. And there are some wrestlers that even if they're life, I'm talking about mostly Mexican wrestlers, that their life depended on saying that he or she, or especially he, is the person behind that mask, they would rather die. And that's the bottom line. They would rather die. They do not drop kayfabe like ever. And we knew about the AAA, but we heard about AAA. We weren't so exposed to it. And the thing is that many people right here in Puerto Rico, they criticize the promotion in which Bruce Brody died. But that very same promotion, in the way of feeding education and information about the whole wrestling world, in that part, I have to give it to Victor Jovica and Carlos Colon, because they had this segment on their wrestling show that still airs to this day. I think is one, if not the longest continuing wrestling show. I think Guinness should check that, because Super Estrellas de la Lucha Libre is transmitted through WAPA, and I think also WAPA America, and I think it is the longest running wrestling